Millete Birhanemaskel, the president of Tigray Community of Colorado. Participants will gain invaluable knowledge to secure external funding and strengthen their organizations. Before we dive into the beef and the fun stuff, we're going to do a little bio and background on Millete. Millete Birhanemaskel is a Tigrayan human rights advocate and a business owner. As the current president of Tigray Community of Colorado and the first woman ever to hold the position, she has already led various growth and development initiatives. Within the first year, the Tigray Community of Colorado has secured and locked in over $400,000 for programming and capital investment. Millete and her board have successfully built their community, and at the 2023 Walta in Dallas, she was on a panel discussion discussing how we can build bridges outside of the community, and she also spoke about successful relationship building the Colorado community has already experienced. During that panel, Millete offered to share their learnings with the Tegaru organizations so we can diversify our internal funding. Thank you, Millete, for joining us. So we're going to lay out some ground rules for participants. We are going to be recording this, so if you have any friends, family that are able to miss it, it's going to be posted up on the TPN page. Any questions, remarks you have, please feel free to drop them into the chat. We will be recording and catching all of them. Team members will be dropping them, so we won't miss anybody. So just want to give a brief insight on the importance of grants and grant writing in the community. Grants are, there's an extraordinary amount out there available for grant funding and programs for each of our communities. In order to build and develop our communities to push forward, we have to be able to understand how these grants operate and what peer reviewers are really looking for. So Millete has a presentation prepared for us, and she's going to go ahead and dive into that now. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Walta, and Tegaru Professionals Network, TPN, for putting this event together. It's really an honor to be here and share, what we've done in Colorado that's successfully gotten us now $450,000 worth of grants and counting in less than 2 years, in about a year and a half. So the big thing the reason I wanted to do this is, number one, I want to stress that there's nothing special about us in Colorado, other than we're just following a formula. And I'm going to share a lot of that with you all today so that you can go and do the same thing. I don't have any special secrets or whatever. It really is just a formula and following certain steps and making sure you have certain things in place. So that's why I'm here. That's what I want to share with you all. And I think we'll just dive in. I have just 10 slides. It's short. I'll share my screen here in a second. We'll go through some basic things that need to be in place before you can even start thinking about applying for grants. I think I've gotten a lot of calls over the past 6 months as people have heard about what we're doing. And so this will be a good sort of foundation for people to follow. And TPN, feel free, if you have a copy of these slides after the fact, if you want to share them or make them publicly available, that's great too. I think it's good. There's a checklist in there for different organizations to use. So let me share my screen. Hooray. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Okay, great. Okay, wonderful. So this is grant writing. And obviously I'm with the Tigray Community of Colorado, a 30-year organization, 501c3 nonprofit. And I am the first woman chair in this position, which is really cool. And I've been here for a year and a half now. So this is the background photo that you see is an annual event that we do that's coming up again in 2 weeks called Camp Tigray, which is really cool. I'll talk about that more later. So is this in the way? Can you guys read this okay? Walta has everything. Okay, great. Okay, so the Tigray Community of Colorado has successfully obtained $450,000 in grants in less than 2 years. And the main sources of these grants are federal, so the federal government, and also private foundations. And they're a combination of capital grants as well as program grants. So I'll talk more about that in another slide. Let me come back. Okay, so the biggest thing that if you take one thing away from this entire conversation, it's what story do you want to tell? I talk about this a lot in terms of Tegaru and Tigray and our fight and our struggle for freedom. But it's equally true with any organization or business. So you have to know your story, the story you're trying to tell. Because if you think about it, you're trying to convince somebody, whether it's a government, a foundation, an individual, to fund you. And so you have to be able to tell them a story, and they have to be able to connect with your story in order to give you funds. It's not enough just to be a nonprofit. It's not enough even to be doing good work. You have to be able to tell the story of the work that you're doing. So when I came on the board a year and a half ago, I had a really amazing team and still have an amazing team of board members. And the first thing we did was we had a full day like visioning meeting, basically. And so we came together and said, we invited professionals in to come and talk to us. And we said, what is our vision and what is our mission? And so I'm sharing with you here what we came up with. And so this is an exercise I would encourage every organization to go through. Find people in the community. There are actually Tegaru in the community who can even lead you through this like visioning process. So if you need a connection for that, there's a young woman, and for some reason her name is escaping me, but in Seattle now who can do this for you, but there are others as well. So there's lots of people. So ours is, the Tigray Community Center's vision is to become a lighthouse for generations of Tigrayans who are thriving in Colorado. So it needs to be clear. It needs to be concise. Your vision is something broad. It's not like your vision is not something you achieve and you're done. Your vision is like this, very lofty, far-reaching thing that doesn't have an end point, just to help you like kind of think about what is a vision. And then your mission is more concrete and more like, what do you do kind of stuff. So the other thing we did after we developed our vision and mission is we talked about goals. And so we set 1-year goals, 3-year goals, and 5-year goals. Every organization should be doing this. You should know where you're going. Otherwise, you're just kind of floundering. So for us, these are just our goals. This doesn't mean this is what you will develop when you create your when you have your meeting and create your goals. But in less than 1 year, we said we would revamp our governance documents, we would improve our technology, and we would solidify the programs that we wanted to have. And we accomplished those things. In less than 3 years, we said we would start applying for grants. We would have at least one paid employee, and we would have a groundbreaking on our community center site, because we own an acre of land in Aurora that has like a 1-room schoolhouse, and we want to build that. We want to build and develop that to better suit our needs. So far, we've accomplished 2 out of the 3 of those 3-year goals. And our groundbreaking will come soon. We're in the middle of planning now with the city and getting through all of that stuff. Our 5-year goal is to absolutely be completed with the building and have a full operational staff with a hearty budget, all of our programming just really robust. So those were our goals. And we're tracking all of those things. Other things that we do is we hold at least one annual member meeting so that the community can come together, elect new board members if we need to do that, discuss what's going on in the community, answer questions for community members. We also do monthly board meetings, and we text. We have a text app that we use so we can text and email updates, announcements, things like that. So we're trying to stay in constant communication with our community. So all of these things help you to sort of define and tell your story repeatedly. People have to hear your story over and over and over again, including in our community. So these were some of the first things that we did so we could all be on the same page as a board and as a community. So what are the things that you need to do to get started? There's a lot of preparation work that has to happen before you can ever go apply for a grant. First and foremost, you have to get all of your governance in order. So are you a 501c3? If you are, perfect. If you're not, it's really easy to do. Actually, the process has been really simplified in the last few years. So you need to do that. Do you have an EIN number, basically a social security number for your organization? If you don't, you need to get one. Very easy to do. It's literally online on the irs.gov website. Takes 30 minutes to do. So you have to do that. You need a unique entity ID number. That is if you plan to apply for federal grants, which we did. It was our very first grant. People said we couldn't do it, that, federal grant is hard to get, but we did. So sam.gov is where you would get that and where you would register for that number. But you need to be a 501c3 and you need an EIN number before you can go apply for a unique entity ID number. Of course, you need bylaws. You need articles of incorporation in your state. You need a good board. By the way, we didn't start from scratch. We actually reached out to the community center in Atlanta and said, hey, can we use your bylaws? Because we had bylaws, but they were really outdated and they weren't thorough. There was a lot of issues and revamping them was really hard. So we just called another Tigrayan center and they were happy to share their bylaws. And so we adapted them for our needs. And that's what we did. So don't reinvent the wheel. Reach out to other organizations, ask for copies of their documents. Anyone will share with you. So you also need a financial manual. Same thing. I reached out to a nonprofit here and borrowed asked for a copy of their financial manual. And then I adapted it for what we do. And then you need a policies and procedure manual. And that was a little more challenging. I used an AI app actually to help create those documents. So we have a rough draft. To be honest with you, I will maybe like a year down the road or so, take all of our governance documents to probably a lawyer or somebody to go over them, because we're growing so fast that we really want to have really good documents in place. But it's better to have something rather than nothing. So these are all the things that you could at least get started on. Walta, do you want to ask me a question now, or do you want?
Yeah, I wanted to pop a question in real quick, just to harp on. First of all, I commend all the work and organization you guys established in Colorado. I'm curious, was it already established when you assumed position as president a year and a half ago, or have you guys put this in place in that time frame?
That's a good question. So we, our 501c3 was in place. We had an EIN in place. We had bylaws in place, but they didn't work. They actually literally didn't work because there were things in there that go against nonprofit rules in Colorado. So we had to just revamp and start over. So we at least had the 501c3, but we weren't filing our 990 every year. You're supposed to file a 990 so that the government knows you still exist and what your finances look like. And the 990 is such an easy process, especially if you don't have a lot of income. If you have less than $50,000 in income for your nonprofit, it's super easy to file. It's a 990 easy. It takes 5 minutes and it costs $10 to file. So, we weren't in compliance with some of those things, but so some of it was in place, but really we had a lot of heavy lifting to do to sort of get it reorganized, and that's fine. And so basically any organization, if you're brand new or you've been around forever, you can get yourself in shape. It's not too difficult, especially if you have a checklist and you know what needs to be done. So we kind of were, we didn't necessarily have a checklist. We were just, as we were applying for grants or talking to people, they would ask for different documents. And I was like, oh no, we have to get that. So, I wouldn't tell them that, of course, but then I would, kind of scramble and figure it out and get it together. And so now you have a list so you can, have a starting place. So you don't have to do that.
Excellent. Perfect.
The next thing that we had to do was get our liability stuff in order. So you might think this is kind of nonsense in terms of like board insurance, general liability insurance, an auto policy for your nonprofit, a workers' comp policy. Some of this stuff I thought really we didn't need, but pretty much any grant you apply for is going to ask if you have these documents. For sure, the board insurance and the general liability policy, hands down, without a doubt, you need that to apply for, especially federal or state grants. Maybe some foundations will let you get away with it, but a lot of them ask you to send them your insurance policy. And it's just good to have anyways. So it protects the board if you make a mistake, or if someone is injured, when they're on your property or doing one of your programs or something. The auto policy, you don't necessarily have to have unless you're transporting kids, which we do. But there are some grants that require the auto policy no matter what, even if you're not transporting young people around. So they say, you might have a program manager who drives to a site. And so you need to have some type of auto protection for them if they get injured. So, and then workers' comp, you only need that once you hire somebody. And of course, we have hired our first We made our first hire, which was a youth director. And so we have workers' comp as well. And sort of other things to keep in mind are you have to file your 990 every year. So easy to do, but for some reason, it slips through your fingers. You have to make sure you do that. And then the other thing that was really important for us was in transferring boards, we kind of had a hard time transferring documents. So was this, where's the original IRS EIN letter, for example, or, where are the bank statements or financial documents? So it was a really cumbersome transition process. And so what we did was we just use Google Drive actually, and we share it with all the board members. And now everything we do gets uploaded into this one Google Drive. And now when the board transitions, you just transfer ownership of your email to the new board member and they have all the documents in one place. They don't have to ask, anyone else. It's really easy. It's really smooth. The other thing is branding and logo. Know who you are, make sure you have a logo and you brand everything. Every flyer you put out, every event you do, you should be branding your organization, your nonprofit, because that's going to help you in the long term. So just a couple more tips. And I'm going to go through this. There's only like 10 slides or 9 slides. I'll go through them pretty quickly and then we'll open it up for questions because I think that's going to be more meaningful. But on this slide, I'm asking you, what are your programs? Can you define your community impact and do you document the things that you do? So when you go to a funder, they want to know, for instance, when I talk about Tigrinya class, they want to know how many students, what are their ages, how often do you do classes, how often are they coming? They want like super details about what we're doing. And so you have to have a good tracking mechanism. And it can be as simple as a spreadsheet in your Google Docs, where you have the dates, the name of the student, the age of the student, and you're tracking attendance or whatever. You need pictures, you need video. So we document a lot because those are the things that funders relate to. They want to see the faces of who's involved. The bottom left, for me anyway, at my screen is Ashenda. So we talk a lot about Ashenda, and I'm going to show you our programs in just a second, but you have to document all of these things in order for people to believe and see what you're doing. The other photo I have is of Camp Tigray. And then the bottom one is something new we started, which is Tigray Paints. And it's our way of engaging little people and big people. There's actually some adults in the background as well, to teach the history of Tigray, culture, the culture of Tigray, just bring our young people together. We pretty much every event that we do, we start by asking young people, what is your name and what does it mean? And so, we do these different exercises to sort of build identity for our young people while we're having a good time. And so that's a program that you could easily get funded because it's art, it's culture, it's, all of those things. So you have to figure out how your programs relate to the goals of funders. Okay, so speaking of which, your programs define your organizations and how funders connect with you. So what are your programs? These are some of the things that we do that are bigger programs. So I would say Camp Tigray and Ashenda are our like flagship things that we do. So Camp Tigray for us is about identity building and helping young people make healthy life choices. The belief being that if you know who you are and you're well rooted in your culture, you're a stronger person, you contribute to society, you're healthy, you're all of those things. So that's how we sell Camp Tigray, because the average funder in America does not care if we are Tegaru or we are whatever, so you have to figure out how does that identity building and those workshops, and like we're going to do a hike this year at in Colorado. Obviously we're in Colorado, so we do a lot of hiking. Funders want to know why those things are relevant to helping create or foster healthy young people. So that's Camp Tigray for us. Ashenda is a festival for women and girls to build self-esteem and support entrepreneurship. That's how we sell that to our funders. So we're talking about empowering Black women and girls. We're talking about, when I describe it, I say Ashenda is like Black girl magic on steroids. And so US funders understand that, you know what I mean? So you have to figure out how your programs can resonate with them. And, about building self-esteem and especially entrepreneurship. That is especially female women entrepreneurs. That's very relatable. So You have to connect the dots with your programs. Tigrinya class for us is about cultural preservation. That is actually, you'd be surprised how much funding you can get around that. Because we are a minority ethnic group. We have a distinct language, a distinct culture. There are people who will support that effort. And then we have a whole Tigrayan youth program that revolves around mental wellness, healthy coping mechanisms, trying to less drug use and making healthy life choices, stuff like that. There's a ton of funding around that topic, especially mental health. Us as Tegaru and going through a genocide, that's a big deal. We need all the resources we can get. But in this country in general, young people are really struggling with mental health, an increase in drug use. And, there are programs to try and keep young people out of incarceration and, all these different things. So if you have a program built around that, then you have access to a lot of funds. And then, of course, we have other things that are maybe not as well funded, but like we do a women's coffee event every month. Our Tigray Paints event, we do a community day or graduation day, and we're developing a program around business mentorship. So, and the idea for that is connecting, Tigrayans are entrepreneurs, so connecting young people with our business community and fostering relationships and teaching them entrepreneurship. And there's funding for that as well. Actually, this country loves entrepreneurs. So those are our programs. Your programs are going to be whatever your programs are, but you have to be able to define your programs in a sentence, but you also need to build out, like we have a spreadsheet that lists our programs and has like 2 paragraphs to talk about those programs. So if someone ever says, especially when you start working with a grant writer, they're going to say, what are your programs? You want to be able just to send it over and say, here's all the stuff we do. Then they can start searching for grants that match up with your programs.
Lovely.
Oops, let's see. Go back. Whoop. Okay, so every program needs a budget. So, and that's different than your organizational budget. So you have an organizational budget, which is your entire budget. It lists your programs, but it also lists your all of your other costs, right? Everything else that you're doing. Maybe you pay rent or you have a mortgage. Maybe you have like, a director or accountants or whatever, all of the costs that are associated with running your community center or your nonprofit, whatever that is, you have a big budget for it. And then within that budget, you have a program budget, which should be the bulk of your money. You don't want to have a bunch of overhead costs because they don't like that either. When you're asking for money and 30% is going to just overhead, that's a red flag. So, you want to be sure the bulk of your budget is going toward programming, which, by the way, I would argue your executive director falls into programming to a certain extent. Your, all the different people who some might argue are executive level overhead costs are actually part of your programming costs as well. So you can break that out and, make your budget look the way that it should. Because I'm the executive director, but I do a ton of work with every single program. Like 90% of my time is spent in programming. Not fundraising, although a lot of my time is spent in fundraising too. So I gave you a sample budget for our agenda, and it actually is going to look much different now. So you're going to create what you think your budget will be, and then you're going to have, your projected budget, and then you're going to have your actual budget once you actually do the event. After the fact, costs might change, your program might change. And so that's fine, but you want to at least have a starting place. And so this is just a sample of what we budgeted for Ashenda this year. And it's going to turn out to be just a little bit more than this, and some things have changed, but I wanted to give you a sample just so you have an idea. It doesn't have to be complex. Keep it very simple and to the point. This is a very simplistic budget, but it works and it identifies our costs, and that's really all you're trying to do. Don't worry about trying to have something that's super extravagant or, or complicated.
I'm curious. I don't mean to interrupt you. As far as this, creating the budget and discerning it, what model do you guys use? Do you send the budget? Do you have it specifically for the programs? Here in Atlanta, we have subcommittees, and then we discern depending on the budget and how much is needed, either an annual budget for the subcommittee, and they just figure it out, or do you guys do it by program?
That's a great question. So the way that we do it, because we have a working board, and so pretty much our board members are not only like visioning and planning, but we're also doing a lot of the work right now. So we come together once a year at the beginning of the year, and we come up with our program budgets. And so we look at what happened last year with the previous year, and we make changes. And so in January, we approve all of our program budgets. We make changes as we see fit. And then we kind of backfill that into our big budget, which will include all the other expenses of the organization. We're at, because of our success with grants and also because of our capital project, we have almost an $800,000 budget this year, which is pretty impressive for like a short amount of time. We built that in about a year, a year and a half. So that's amazing from a less than $50,000 budget before. So yeah, we came a long way. So we do that, but I think ideally you would have more capacity. And so you would have people who actually run those programs, who are creating those budgets, and then they would submit that to the board, and the board would be more higher level and look at the budgets, make suggestions and things like that. But right now we have, we're short. We don't have that capacity yet. So a lot of the money that we've gotten has been program money or capital money. We haven't gotten a lot of capacity building money. So I think we will. There's a big grant, a 3-year grant that is going to be announced soon. And I think that will give us capacity money. And so that's going to be really amazing, because then we can hire, the way that I think that we'll do it is we'll hire an administrator who will, not secretary, because they do so much more than secretarial type of stuff, but somebody who can handle a lot of the day-to-day stuff, the paperwork, the connecting, the responding to community, all of that. And also we probably will hire an assistant executive director who will work with me in implementing things. And those will be paid positions, which is great. I think as a community, we have to get away from thinking everything has to be done for free, that everything has to be volunteer. I am a volunteer executive director because A, we didn't have the money when I started. And B, I would rather train someone younger up in the community who's being paid so they can take over and I can walk away rather than be paid and create a position for myself, so, which there would be nothing wrong with me being paid in this position because I do a ton of work, but that's just my preference. So that being said, when you do get ready to get to the point where you want a grant writer, when all of those other things we just talked about are complete, you have to know what you're looking for. So number one, the easiest money to get is program money, program funds. So if you've developed your programs, that's what you'll be going after. They will be smaller grants. It might be a $10,000 grant. It might be a $50,000 grant. Excuse me. But that's what you're initially going to be looking for to fund your programs. And then you'll be looking for capacity building grants. And that will be so you can hire, directors, so you can pay your rent, so you can do those kind of things. Capital grants would be just like it sounds if you have a capital project. So like we have land that we need to develop. So we're very much looking for capital funds. And we've had some success in that too. We got a $250,000 federal grant for capacity. Thank you for capital. It was a capital grant. It's reimbursement based though. So that's another thing. Sometimes you get grants where they pre-fund you and then you just have to every month, give them updates or quarterly or semi-annually. They're all different. But sometimes you get program grants, and certainly our capital grant is reimbursement based. So you have to spend the money and then give them receipts and show them what you've done to get reimbursed. So keep that in mind too. When you do hire a grant writer, there's 2 different kinds of grant writers. There's one that will be paid hourly. And regardless of whether you get a grant or not, you pay them an hourly fee. You pay them for their time because they wrote the grant for you. They did the work. Another grant writer is someone who gets paid as a percentage of their success. So if they get you a $100,000 grant, they might they'll build it into the grant where they get paid 10% of that, for example. Those are harder to find, I think. We have someone who we pay hourly. And we were in a position where we couldn't really afford that initially. So I made a donation to the community center. And so you can find people who will do this. And it was pretty much reimbursement based to pay for the grant writer. So for the first year, not even the first year, the first 6 months, I paid out of pocket for the grant writer. And the way that I did that, and I did that for a reason, because I knew it would be successful, but I had to show success before I could justify the organization paying for it. And I gave them a budget, and I told the grant writer, we can only do $500 a month. And they said, okay. And it happened to be someone I know, and they knew a lot about Tigray and everything that was happening. And so they wanted to be a part of that in terms of helping. And that was their talent, their grant writers. And so they were willing to work with us, and we had immediate success. We had our first grant was a $10,000 grant, and it was just a general operating grant, which was great. It's not a lot of money, but for us, it was a lot of money. And it showed that, you know, this is a useful endeavor. And so it's gone on from there. The most that they've gotten us is we got a $65,000 grant. That's a 2-year grant for our youth programming. So anyway, my point is, you got to find someone who's passionate about your organization, understands what you're trying to do. And then you have to build a budget around that. And you're not going to have, it took us, I want to say 4 months before we got our first grant. So it just takes time, because they have to learn who you are. They're going to apply for stuff. They have to search for stuff. So it's a little bit of a process. And I would say 4 months is fast. It probably is more like 6 to 8 months normally before you start seeing results. So don't, you know, you have to build that into your time, your thinking. If you're going to hire a grant writer, and then you need to know what you need. Are you going for program funds? Are you going for capital funds? Are you going for capacity building funds? That's important. So, all right, I'm almost done, and then we'll do questions. So I did create a checklist for you. The first thing you need to do before you do anything else is you need to make sure you have good bylaws. You're incorporated in your state, whatever state you live in, and that you have a clear mission and vision. Take the time to do the exercise with your board to really define this stuff. And I know TPN, you've done a lot of work, and Walta has done a lot of work with organizations helping, you know, with vision and mission. So I'm sure you have resources for folks. You need a financial manual. So happy to share ours. I'm just going to say our documents are not the best right now, but they're workable and they're a starting place. So you want to make sure you have a financial manual before you have money, not after you get money. So we did some things backwards, but anyways, you want to do this first, because you want to know who can handle money. Where is it kept? How can you write checks? What are the checks and balances to make sure nothing happens, you know, nothing corrupt happens. Like, you want to make sure all of that stuff is in place on the front end. And most funders will ask you for this anyway. You want to have policies and procedures for your organization related to people who work there, related to safety, employment, you know, all of that stuff. And of course, you want to recruit a qualified, committed, diverse board, different, I would say all ages, backgrounds. We're all Tegaru. I don't think there's a problem if you have a non-Tigrayan on your board, in my opinion. There may be a skill that you need that we can't find in our community. I don't think it's a problem to recruit someone, you know, an American or whoever to help you. But you do want to be, since it's a Tigrayan organization, I'm assuming most of us are, you want to have primarily Tigrayans, right? Running our stuff. So once all of those things are in order, you want to register your nonprofit at the state level. So just get incorporated. This is like a 20-minute process for us in Colorado. It's very easy. You go on the Secretary of State website and you apply. You also need to get a state tax exemption, especially if you own property, because you don't want to pay property tax. That's a little more cumbersome, but you do that with the county assessor. You want to apply for your EIN. You do that with the IRS. You want to apply for your 501c3 federal tax exemption. You do that with the IRS, and you need your EIN number to do that. And then when you have that, you'll apply for your unique entity ID number, and that's at sam.gov. And don't worry about taking too many notes. You'll have all these slides. Then once you have these things, I have to move this screen around a little bit so I can see. Okay, then you want to do, you know, get your insurances. You want board liability, general liability. You might need auto. And of course, once you hire workers' comp. And then technology. I can't stress this part enough, but we immediately got QuickBooks when we got our first grant, so we could track everything really thoroughly. When you do an audit, you just give the auditor access to your QuickBooks and they're able to look at everything as well as your bank statement, and your bank accounts are linked to your QuickBooks. So it's just an easy way to track. We were doing manual bookkeeping before that, which is insanity, but we also didn't have that much money, so it was easy to do. Once you start getting into grants and your grantor asks you for accounting, you want to be able to give it to them quick. So you want QuickBooks. We use Square for events. When we sell stuff at events and things, you need a good member management, like CRM system. We were using Member Planet, I think it's called, and I hate it. It's really difficult. They don't pay on time. It's really stressful. So we're looking for a new one right now. And then you want a text and email app because you want to be able to stay in constant contact with your members, especially text. A lot of them won't check email, but they'll check their text messages. And we use GoDaddy for our website. And then, of course, you want to create your programs, your budgets, your program budgets, and your general budget. So if I were to give you a checklist, this would be it. There's lots of stuff in between, and other things will come up, but this is generally what you should be working on. So that is sort of the end of my presentation. We're tigraycolorado.org. If you want to look at our website, we have pictures from our different programs up. We have video from like media up there, contacts for all of our board members up there. I'm going to stop sharing and come back to my screen. And get back to you, Walta. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Millete. That was an abundance of information. Personally, I can tell you I learned so much about grant writing and all the steps before actually writing grants and getting people in there. So we're going to just jump into some questions, starting with a little bit of your experience in Colorado. We've been following the success in Colorado and obviously all the communities across America. We want to emulate that success. So just tell us about that first $10,000 grant and your point getting to 400,000. Maybe touch on how many rejections you guys dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. So that first grant, and this is something you all should be doing. So when you get to a point where you want to start looking for grants, you're going to start reaching into your connections at this point, right? So hopefully you've done some groundwork. It's okay if you haven't, but maybe you have connections to like city council people or your state representatives, or even your federal representatives. But that first $10,000 grant that we got was from an organization called the Denver Foundation. And they have a specific program called the BRIC program, Black Resilience in Colorado. And they specifically fund Black directors of nonprofits. So I'm sure this exists in in every state that you're in, wherever you are in the country, you can find this kind of stuff. So how do you find it out? You talk to your city council members, you talk to your, representatives and say, hey, we're a nonprofit. Here's the kind of work we do. Do you know of any foundations that exist? Your city and states fund a lot of foundations. So like a lot of our youth programming came from 2 organizations. One is called Caring for Denver. It's funded by sales tax money here. And then also Caring for Colorado. Both are funded by sales tax money or by, state funds. So it's technically funded by these governments, but they're foundations. So if I went to my city council and said, do you know anything, any money available that could fund our program that's around mental health, for example, they would say, yes, there's a program called Caring for Denver, right? So you have to reach out to your representatives. There's so much that they know and can do to help you in your organization, but they have to know you exist first. So make sure you're making those contacts. The other thing, so applying for that was really nice because even though it's competitive and there are a lot of nonprofits here, I've been really, really active in like social justice work here. So people know me. And so I knew a lot of people who were connected to these organizations, and it doesn't necessarily help me get the money or not, but it does at least give me, I'm able to get information and people can tell you what's going on. So another grant that we got was from the Gates Foundation, and it's a $30,000 capital grant. So it's not, for them, it's not a lot of money. And for us, it is a lot of money, but it's also not for a project that we think is like $3 million. You're like, oh my God, how many grants do I have to get to 3 million, which is not, all of your money is not going to come from grants anyways. But, a lot of these people are ready and willing to fund you if you have what you need to have in place. And so it's really all of those things that I was showing you earlier. It's not that hard. And you really do have to start by looking for smaller grants. But I'll say that with a caveat, because our actual first grant, so we got that $10,000 grant, but our first big grant was $250,000. And it was the second grant that we got ever in the history of our organization. And it was a federal grant, but it was tied to COVID. So that was the other thing I want to stress. There's a lot of federal money tied to COVID that has to be spent. And if it's not spent, it goes back, into, I don't know where it goes back to, I guess our debt or whatever, back to, the government. So there are organizations that are trying to spend this money, but you have to tie your programming to something COVID. And that's not hard to do. For instance, for Ashenda, where we applied for another grant, it's a smaller grant. I think it's like $10,000, maybe $15,000 to help us put Ashenda on. And the way we tie it to COVID, because this is also federal money, even though it's being administered through the city of Denver, the way we tie it together is in Ashenda, we want to work with and recognize women entrepreneurs. Well, these women entrepreneurs, many of their businesses were impacted during COVID. And so we want to do business planning and, strategic planning and help them with marketing or whatever to get their businesses, back on track and whatever, because they were impacted by COVID. So there's ways to weave your stories together that are accurate, true, and honest, but also relate to the funder, and your community needs. So you just got to figure out how to tie those pieces together. But there's a lot of COVID money out there that is being administered by the states and cities. So you just have to talk to your representatives to get that information.
Wow, that is remarkable. First grant, 10 grants, second grant, 250,000, $250,000. I have to say that's impressive. So what kind of projects are well received by funders? And could you touch on some of the initiatives and projects that were successfully secured external funding?
Yeah, so we've had let me say this, funders don't really like capital projects. They really don't. It's hard to get capital money. We got lucky. And I think they don't like it when you're in the design phase. So we're still very much in the early design phase. If we were 75% done, then it's easy to get capital money to finish. But when you're on the other end, you're in that first 10, 15% of the project, it's more difficult. So let me set that expectation. Funders really, really love programs that relate to young people. So whatever, and 70 to 80% of our work is around young people. So, and honestly, I think that's true for community centers across the country, really. The big thing I want to stress is this is all for work that's happening in the States, in the US, because that's where your funders are. That's, what I mean, whether it's a private foundation or, a government entity. I get a lot of phone calls about getting money for NGOs or people who want to do work abroad, back home. That's a whole different conversation. So let me make sure I stress that. It's an entirely different conversation. I don't even have the expertise or experience to give advice on that, but I know it's very, very different. So when you're applying for a grant, just read through the information. It'll tell you what they're looking for, whether it's they specifically want to talk about mental health or they specifically want to talk about reducing drug use. That's a big one too, because drug use among young people in general in this country is off the charts. So, and we're not exempt for that. We live in this community and our young people are also, deal with that as well. So any kind of, and you don't have to have a bunch of misfits to apply for that. That's not the point. The point is to give kids resources, information, so that they don't make those kind of choices. And so that's where you'll have a lot of success. Things around arts, culture, things like that. You'll have success in getting grants as well. So I would say the first thing you want to do, I wouldn't even worry about what does a funder want to see? I would start with just defining your programs and what do you want to do and why are you doing it? Once you know that, then you can look for grants that match that need. And there's so much out there. There's no shortage at all.
Remarkable. It sounds a lot like it doesn't matter where on the spectrum a community is, they can plant the seed, start now by getting the organization and data and start establishing those projects and programs they want in place.
Absolutely. 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 I want to answer a question too, because I see one about 501c3 and they said, do we have to renew our 501c3 or file some sort of report annually? Yes, you have to. You don't renew it per se, but you have to file the 990. I think if you have 3 consecutive years where you don't file it, then it expires. And then you have to go through a whole process, something like that. But you do have to, do that. And then in terms of someone wants to know if we can do a workshop on a 501c3, I wouldn't say that's my area of expertise, but I'm sure TPN could find someone to do that. A lot of nonprofits started during the war that are 501c3s. So I'm sure someone from one of those organizations could do that. It's gotten a lot easier now. It's been more streamlined, I think, compared to when I remember my first 501c3 that I did like 20 years ago was very cumbersome and complicated. Now it's really easy and online. So it's a much easier process. So maybe TPN can take that on and for another time.
Absolutely. I believe you'll be able to get that going possibly latter half of this year, next quarter, maybe the following. And we'll definitely get a blueprint or a foundation going, a framework for the rest of the communities to follow. Can you just touch on some of the impacts you've seen in your own community?
Yeah, it's a number of things. One is, as Tegaru, we've been carrying a lot of weight. So, I think about even our nonprofit, 30 years, for 30 years, our elders have self-funded, their own organization. And that's really, really impressive to be able to carry it that long with no help from no one on the outside, and feeling just that feeling of isolation, even if we did it to ourselves, you know what I mean, to some extent, because we just didn't have the connections, or maybe there were language barriers, cultural barriers, whatever it was. But that they could carry it that long and successfully that long. Sometimes there's criticism, or people try to compare what we've done in a year and a half compared to the last 30 years. They'll say, well, what have you done for 30 years? Look what they've done in a year and a half. And to me, that's a really unfair, criticism, because it was entirely different in terms of what they were facing, and us who grew up here and were educated here and have connections here and friends here. I'm like, you can't compare that. In fact, what they did was far more heroic and far more challenging than what we're doing. That being said, there has to be a transition into bringing younger folks into true leadership positions, not just to sit there or do your flyers for you or whatever, but like true leadership positions, because the result is what we're doing, and bringing in an enormous amount of other people's money to support our organization. I keep saying, as Tegaru, we've been hidden in plain sight. We're here, and we've been contributing to our communities, our cities, our counties, but they don't know who we are. Our neighbors don't know who we are. And so it's been a big project of tell your story, so that people know who you are. And once they do, they'll support, they want to support. So it's been uplifting for our community. It's given sort of a new energy even to, our elders in the community, to see what's possible and to see that we have friends. We actually do have friends, and they're willing to help and support our efforts. To see the excitement of young people who want to learn their language, and they show up every week. And, some of them are going to be teaching Tigrinya soon. They're so good. They're so talented. In terms of writing, I'm like, some of them are writing better than I can at this point. So it's really, and I'm talking about young people, like 12 years old. So they're just so that committed. But there's a hunger to really understand our culture. And we just have to find the balance of like rooting our kids and also helping them thrive in this culture. So, there's an intersection there, and we just have to find it. And there's a lot of support for that.
I agree. And I love to see it and hear it. The young leaders, you guys are really creating and building leaders for the community, for the future. It's beautiful. It's empowering.
Thank you.
I want to move on to some strategies for effective grant writing. So what formulas do you guys have in place for securing external funding?
That's an interesting question, because I would say there really is no formula, because every grant is so different. The main thing is what I showed you earlier. Like if you have taken the time to do all of those things and have clearly defined your programs, clearly defined your budgets, that's the formula. That's what you need. They want to see that. Oh, and also document what you're doing. You have to be able to show people what you're doing. So for instance, we apply for grants, and now we have a grant writer. We work with that grant writer exclusively now. I wrote that grant for $250,000, by the way. I personally wrote that grant, which was insane. Yeah, and I've never written a grant before. So, but now our grant writer does all of that stuff for us. So, but it's actually nothing special that I did, because all I was doing was telling our story. I was telling people what we're doing, why we need it, why it's significant. And then the other thing is answering every question exactly how it's asked. Don't go into tangents. Don't miss the point of what they're asking for. Like very specifically answer whatever that organization or foundation or whatever is asking for. So our grant writer does all of our grant writing now, but we meet once a month and we talk about like, what do we want to fund? Where are our funding gaps? And then she'll get updated financial statements for me, which is nice to have QuickBooks because I could do that in an instant. And then she tells me what, 2 or 3 things she's found, and I tell her if it fits or if it doesn't fit. The other thing is it's important to know what doesn't work for you, because all of these grants come with a lot of reporting requirements, which is good because they want to make sure you use the money for what you say. But sometimes things are not the right fit. And so there have been a couple of times that I would say, I don't think that's the right grant for us, or I think this particular program is well funded. So can we focus on something else? Like I would say we have a lot of youth funding now. We're pretty well set for our capacity. If once we're able to hire, directors, and we have an administrator and all of that kind of stuff, an executive assistant, that kind of thing, we can take on more. But you also have to know when you're like, okay, this is our capacity now. We can't do much more given our manpower or woman power. And so I think it's important to know that and define that. But again, the formula is just know who you are and be able to tell your story really well. So when we apply for a grant, they often will do a site visit. And a site visit is they'll come to your facility. If you have one, we do. If you don't, they'll do a Zoom call with you. It's all the same, because the people are the organization. It's not like a building, right? So it's you. And so they'll meet with you, and then you have to once again, tell them your story. And so it's nice because I just used, iMovie or something really simple, and put together pictures from different events that we've done. If there are interviews with young people, I'll throw some of that in. There's music. We have media media coverage we've had. I'll use some of that. And it's literally like a 3-minute video. I use Tigray music throughout to make it fun. But it gives the grantor a visual of your community and who you're working with. And they love to see that because they just want it to be real and tangible. And you got to give them something to remember and take away. So I would just encourage that. And you don't have to do something super professional. I mean, if you do, great. But I literally use iMovie and throw clips in and music, and I'm and then use that. And it's good enough. It's good enough. You're just trying to tell your story the best way that you can. And so you do that primarily by knowing what you're doing. A lot of organizations, you're like, yeah, we were a community center. I'm like, okay, but what do you do? And you're like, well, we can't do anything because we don't have money. I'm like, you can't. You have to have programs in place. So define, put your programs together, define what they are, and build a budget around it. Even if you currently are not, that's not the budget you're using. So for instance, we didn't have money early on, but we were doing Tigray classes. And so we were scraping, I'd go buy a ream of paper. Someone would go buy some markers. We just did whatever we had to do, but we still have a budget, and our budget is 40 or 45,000 or something to do Tigray class in a very simple way. It could be bigger. But we currently don't spend 45,000 because we don't have that money, right? So we figure it out, but you still have a budget. Your actual might end up being more or less than whatever you budgeted, but you want to create a budget and an adequate budget for whatever you're trying to do. So that's the secret sauce. It really is. There's nothing more to it than just being able to clearly tell your story, visually, written and in numbers.
That makes such perfect sense. And I resonate a lot with what you're saying. I do a lot of business development for a marketing firm, and it's just about perception and telling your story, knowing yourself. And all the fancy stuff can be left aside as long as you appeal to the human nature of the funders.
Exactly.
So I'm curious, what are some common mistakes to avoid during grant writing?
Ooh, that's a good question. What were some mistakes that we made? Because we have been declined. There have been a couple of grants that we were denied. And to me, that doesn't necessarily mean we made a mistake. It just means it wasn't the right opportunity or the right moment, or they had a greater need somewhere else. But I would say, what's a mistake? God, I can't even think of a mistake. Maybe not knowing why you're applying for a grant, just because there's a grant out there, like applying for it anyways. I don't think you need to do that. I think if you're going to apply for something, make sure it's relevant. The other thing is maybe, I don't believe you can shoot too high. Sometimes there were a couple times people try to tell us like, you should like lower your expectations. I think that's a mistake. I think you should just go for whatever makes sense for what you're doing. The other thing is, another mistake is, or potential mistake, I guess, is thinking you need someone else to help you. You really don't need anyone else to help you. A grant writer is fantastic, but you don't have to have a grant writer to get grants. It helps because they may have connections, or they're better at telling stories because that's what they do. But you don't have to have a grant writer to do this stuff. You just have to have your information, your story, well developed. That's really what's going to help you. I don't think there are any mistakes. We're all learning as we go. So, and don't start from scratch. That's probably a mistake. Don't start from scratch. Just find someone who's doing it like we're doing right now. We've done it. And so we're sharing, some of the things that worked for us. But I mentioned earlier too, it was Atlanta that gave us their bylaws. So reach out to other organizations. Don't start from scratch, and just improve on whatever they give you or adapt it for you.
Makes sense. I agree. Definitely lean on other communities, and we all got to start somewhere. You know what I mean? Lay the seeds and begin somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So before we dive into fund diversification and sustainability, I wanted to ask a few logistic questions around the grant writer. So how much are they paid hourly on average, and what type of work are they doing? Are they doing the research in entirety as well as the writing?
That's a great question. So, how much do they charge us hourly? I want to say it might be like $100 an hour or something. I can't remember exactly. And this particular person gave us a break because they wanted to contribute to Tigray, because it was someone I know. So I want to say they were charging us like half their normal rate, but I think like $100 an hour is normal, somewhere in that range. And they do the research in terms of finding grants that match whatever your program is. But that's why you don't want to waste their time. So you want to make sure that you can tell them exactly what your programs are, exactly what you need funded. That way, when they're searching, they know when they read it, oh, I know this works for the Tigray community in Atlanta or whatever. So there's that. But the other nice thing is, especially an organization like the one that we're working with, and I don't know, I've been asked before, would they work with another Tigrayan community? They probably would. I have to, I don't want to make the connection unless an organization, another community center knows that they're going to do it. I don't want to waste their time, you know what I mean, for like thoughts or ideas or whatever. But if there is an organization that says, you know what, we have the money ready, we're going to do this grant writing, connect us, then I'll do that. And of course, assuming they have capacity and they want to do it, because a lot of that stuff could potentially overlap too. There's stuff that we're doing that they may be able to apply. We both may be able to apply for. So it's some overlap for them, if assuming our programs are similar or whatever. But we gave them a budget and we said, this is our budget. This is what we're comfortable with. Please stay within the budget. And sometimes they would go over budget. Like there'd be a month where it's $900, but it would, because in the summer, spring, fall, a lot of activities happening. And then in the winter, it would die down. So maybe you're only paying a couple $100s in another month or whatever. So you have to be able to kind of balance that out. but they do all the research in terms of finding grants. However, I'll find stuff too randomly and I just forward it to the grant writer and say, hey, what do you think? I think this could work for this program. And she'll take it and then do the proposal. But she'll do the whole application, fill out the application, and she's just filling it out from whatever we've given her already. So the program descriptions, sometimes there's specific questions that they want. And so she'll send that over and I'll just answer the questions and send them back to her. But we'll create a username and log in, and then she'll use that for all of our different applications. And then she always puts me as the person to contact. So then they would reach out to us if they have more questions or whatever, but they do a lot of that work. Somebody asked if we could give a template. The thing is, there really isn't a template because every grant is so different. I'm still happy to give you an example of, like, for instance, the $250,000 capital grant that I wrote. There are specific questions and then you answer the questions. So I'm happy to share that with you all. But again, when you apply for a grant, it's going to have different questions. So there is no template. That's why I'm saying just define your programs and your budgets. That's going to be what you use to fill out the applications that come your way. So, but I can share that if you want. I'm happy to do that. And even the list of donors, I can share our list of donors, but it's not going to be relevant because a lot of the money that we get is local. So Gates Foundation, definitely, like that's one that you could apply for wherever you are. But for instance, Caring for Denver or Caring for Colorado are specific to this city and specific to this state. The Denver Foundation, specific to our city. That's why I was saying you have to talk to your local leadership and ask them what's available in your state. And just Google too, like grants in Austin or wherever you are, or social justice grants or, cultural grants or, just look stuff up. You'll find information, and then that will help you determine what works for you. Everything's not going to work for you. Don't force anything to work for you. You have to, do some work and see if it really is a good fit.
Thank you for the insights, Ron, and the grant writer. And honestly, before this call, I had a feeling like grants, I looked at it in a mysterious, kind of shrouded in mystery sense, but it sounds like, when I'm applying for a job, I build my resume to go for that job. Or if I'm bringing a proposal to an investor, I got to know their needs and their values beforehand. It sounds very similar. Exactly.
There's a good question in here too. It says, is a board necessary? I like that question. I'm going to answer that question, even though it may seem like a no-brainer, but it is so necessary. Because by the way, it's not only necessary to have a nonprofit, right? Like when you actually register, they ask you about your board, and when you apply for grants too, they ask who's on your board, how many members, how often do you meet? They literally ask you those questions. But the other thing is, when you haven't gotten grants before, they want to know the makeup of your board. Like, what's your experience? If we give you this money, do you have someone who specializes in finance? Do you have somebody who specializes in, X, Y, or Z? So they want to know that your organization can handle the grant once you get it. And the way you show that is by showing the expertise of your board. So like we had someone in construction. We have a board member who works in construction. So when we applied for the $250,000 grant, we said, we have an expert, who knows construction management. And so they're going to help us in that aspect. We had someone who was a finance specialist at a bank. And so we were able to say that. We had someone on our board who used to run a nonprofit that had a large budget. So we actually have board bios that are attached with when we do applications so that they can see who our board members are, because sometimes you don't have the history as a board of having handled grants, but you have professionals who can manage that money.
Incredible, man. Thank you for that insight. We definitely need to have structure and boards so, these funders and organizations understand who we are, better understand our stories, like you said. I'm curious, have you had more success? I know you said the bulk of the money was from federal, the 250, but have you had more grants, public or private, accepted?
Oh, that's a really good question. So most of our grants were public. The private would be the BRIC money, from the Denver Foundation, because that's a private foundation. And you know what? So I kind of misled you. Our first actual grant was from an individual. And it was a woman named Emma, who is really, really, really nice, young, wealthier person who I met. And I met her and was just talking to her in general about Tigray and all the things that were happening and how our young people were suffering. And I talked to her about our community center. And this is early on when I first came on, and we had a bunch of issues. Like we needed money to like repair windows and doors, and our facility had, because of COVID, had been shut down for the most part, and we had water leaks and there were so many problems, and we needed a chunk of money just to do repairs so we could even start to do classes and get back in our space. And I was just talking to her as a human being, not asking her for money. And lo and behold, like she comes from money, and she gave us a $10,000 grant out of her own pocket, actually, and just to repair our facility. And so you have to not only know your story, but you have to tell your story to everybody, to anyone you meet, not with the expectation of getting something from them, but because you just never know like what the universe has out there for you, or what, how people are going to respond. So that was actually the first money that we got at all from anyone out, non-Tigrayan money. So, but the bulk of our money has been public stuff. Yeah.
Public stuff. So state more over federal as well?
State, federal. Yep.
Makes sense. What about some tips for building relationships with partnerships and collaborating with other organizations?
That's a good question. So I think as young people, you've done a lot of work already in terms of like where you volunteer, where you grew up, like relationships you have, but you don't know how to leverage those relationships. And I think that's not the same as like using people, but it's, you took the time to foster and build a relationship. And so you can use that to also help one another, right? So like growing up, I was on the Denver Sister Cities International board, and I did the Project Education Sudan board. And I did some stuff like I was on the government's Economic Development Council. Like I've taken the time to give to all these different things that made sense to me. And so that taught me that it's okay to also ask people to give back to us. So think about your relationships, and it might be the most random. It won't even be what you're thinking of. You know what I mean? Like sometimes some wealthy person and you're like, they should give to our organization. You would be surprised who it is. I have a friend, for example, they have a family foundation, which I always knew about, but I never really thought of, I never thought to like ask her for anything. We were just friends. We got our MBA together, and I invited her to Ashenda, just to come to Ashenda. Like, you should come and hang out or whatever. And she shared stuff about Tigray. That year, this was last year, in December, her family gives out a bunch of money, and they sent us a check for, I think it was $5,000 from her family foundation. It might've been $4,500, but random. I wasn't even expecting that. So, I invited her as just a friend, and it turned into that. So you never know, where funding is going to come from, connections are going to come from. Someone could introduce you to the right person that will end up being your funder or help you in some way. So don't approach relationships like, what can I get from somebody? But you should always just share your story and what you need. There's nothing wrong with talking about what you need. Like when I was talking to Emma about our community center, and she's like, oh, like this is easy for me. I can write you a check tomorrow. And she didn't only do that. She set it up so that others could donate too. And so she connected me with a group that put us on their page of nonprofits in Colorado, and they just like blast a whole bunch of people. And we got another, the numbers escape me now, but another like 5,000 or 6,000 or something from people donating $100, $20, whatever, to the organization. So you never know, but those personal relationships, just tell people, just tell them who you are and what you're doing. And you never know. You don't even have to ask for anything. Just make sure they know who you are.
I agree wholeheartedly. I love it. Come from a place of giving, and there are opportunities everywhere. They're going to present themselves as long as we keep on telling our stories.
Absolutely.
So how about some examples of successful fundraising campaigns and events that you guys had in Denver or Colorado?
Yeah. So getting grants energized our community, I would say. even though, we had a big board transition that happened, that was a little bit contentious, which I think a lot of organizations are experiencing, all over. So there was a little bit of like confusion in our community, I think, but I think seeing some of our success energized a lot of people, including our elders. And especially when we got the big $250,000 grant and subsequent ones after that. We do an annual dinner to thank people in the community and also tell them what we're doing. And we decided to tie that to our capital campaign, which is very early on. You usually don't do a capital campaign until you're at least like halfway through. But we started our capital campaign super early. And we did this dinner and we raised almost $250,000 in that dinner from our community. A lot of that was interest-free loans that came specifically, from our business Tigrayan community. But about almost 52,000 was grants or donations from individuals in our community. Everything from $100 from a young person, like a really, really young person, a teenager, to $5,000 donations from leaders in our community. So that was a really successful campaign. And I think it was successful because we took the time to educate our community about what we're doing, why we're doing it. We gave timelines and accountability. We gave a financial statement that was, it had pictures and graphs on it to talk about what we've done, how we got to where we are now, how much money we have in the bank. Like we were very transparent about what we've been able to do. And the community really, really, really loved that. And so their response was, I think Tigrayans are very generous, very, very generous. And so we haven't done like a real big campaign, fundraising campaign outside of that dinner that we did with our community, but we will once we get a little bit further along in our building process, we'll do that. The other, I would say, successful fundraiser would be Ashenda. So Ashenda for us is honoring women and girls, but it's also a fundraising opportunity. And it's our biggest fundraiser that we do for the community center. At least it has been in history. So we try and limit our expenses, but we made, I want to say like somewhere around $40,000 last year. And profit from our Ashenda. It was huge. It was huge. And we publish all that information. So we say, here's our income. Here's where our income came from ticket sales or product sales or whatever, liquor sales, all of that. And then we clearly show what our expenses are. So again, both of those things have been from within our community for the most part, but we've turned Ashenda into a festival. So it's hopefully this year too, we'll have more non-Tegaru who attend as well. But those are just two examples. There's a good question I want to answer too, if I may, Walta, or unless you have another question.
Oh, no, absolutely. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but please.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. I'm glad you're back. The question is, what kind of pushback did you receive from the community when socializing the idea of preparing for grant funding? And I think that's really a good question, because I think the big thing is sometimes we don't understand that you have to spend money to make money. And it's difficult, especially when you have limited funds. But the other thing I want to say is it will be a waste of money if you're not ready for it. So don't just go get a grant writer. You can't do that if you don't do all of those things that we talked about early on the slides. It would be a huge waste of money just to go and get someone if you haven't defined your programs, if you can't clearly articulate the impact that you have. Every grant asks you, how many young people will you serve? How many business owners will you talk to? What is your outcome? What outcome are you hoping to achieve from engaging this community? So it's not as simple as we serve 50 youth every month. That's not enough. They want to know, okay, you serve 50 youth and you do a camping trip and you do whatever. What's the outcome? What outcomes have you accomplished? And so you have to give measurables and create some type of system where you can get feedback and say, our youth, we serve 50 youth this month in this program that lasted 3 months. And we did a survey and 25% reported that they were happier at the end of the program than they started. You know what I mean? Like that's just, I'm just throwing out an example, but you have to have like tangible results that you have to provide to the people who are giving you grant funds. So it's the hard work is once you've gotten the grant money too, like that's, you know, because then you have to be able to report back and answer questions. But I think it's hard sometimes for the community to understand that, you know, that you need to spend this money because we haven't done it before. But it's a good use of money if you're ready for it. If you're not, though, you'll be so disappointed and, you know, it won't work out well.
Excellent. So we're going to actually dive into the questions that were provided in the chat. You answered a good amount of them thus far, but we have, how many grant applications did you submit before receiving your first grant award?
We submit, so it's a little bit of a trick question because when we applied for our first grants, we applied for like 5 or 6 grants, but your responses don't come sometimes until 3 to 6 months later because there's a waiting period for them to review and do things like that. So, but I would say we've gotten like 80% of the grants that we applied for. And I know it's because we're clear about what we're doing. We're very clear about how big our community is. We're very clear about how many people we want to touch. We're very clear about what the need is. We're very clear about what our programs are. And we don't try to go outside of that. So the programs that I showed you earlier, those are, you know, the things that we focus on. And so you might see a grant opportunity for something completely different and go, oh, I could build a program around this, but it's not the right way to do it. And you probably set yourself up for problems. So focus on, like, develop your programs first. That's actually the biggest issue I think that we have from people I've talked to individually who have called over the past few months to say, we want to apply for grants. Like, what do we do? And I go, what are your programs? You know, and they're like, well, we're a community center. We do what you do. I'm like, no, you don't. There's no way, because we're all very different. We might be similar, you know, in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, but your programs are probably entirely different. So, you know, if you define your programs, you'll be fine. But yeah, we've gotten the majority of the grants that we apply for because we know what we're applying for. We don't apply for everything. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Quality over quantity. You guys come ready, prepare, and you understand your programs through and through. It sounds like that's the most pivotal aspects.
Yep.
Got another one here. Millete, could you host a grant writing capacity building session for Tigray-centric organizations, not necessarily tied to community orgs, to pursue programming opportunities in various thematic areas, either in Sudan or Tigray?
I think that's a good question. I don't know that I could host that session because I've never done that. So, and it's a whole different ballgame when you're talking about doing work internationally. It's very, very different than using local money to improve the lives of local citizens. So that's what we've been doing and what we've been really successful at. But I know there are organizations that have successfully, you know, gotten money to do work in Sudan or do work in other places. So I think that we could create that program. I wouldn't be the right person to do that because it's not I have zero experience in doing it, but I think it's a good idea. And there are people in our community that have been doing it, organizations that have been doing it that could help. For some reason, HPN comes to mind. I feel like they've done it. There's another one, it's called like ISBA or ISBA, something like that, but they do work in Sudan in the camps. They've been successful, I think, at getting money. But there's a number of groups that we could reach out to.
I agree. I imagine that the international ring is much different, and tackling that with local money be difficult, probably harder to finagle.
Yep.
A question I'm really curious about is, what ties do you have with these organizations after the grant money's been given to you?
Oh, that's a good question. So a few things. One, a lot of the grants that we've gotten are multi-year grants. So they're either 2-year or 3-year grants. So in order to continue, obviously getting funding, you have to have deliverables and show what you've done successfully. So you're naturally having to document, and I'm a little bit obsessive about that. Because you have to go back and say, here's what we did with the money you gave us. And here was the output, like here was the success of it. Here's why it's important. Not just it's not even as simple as, because we have some programs where we can actually pay for therapy for young people. It's not even enough to say 10 young people went to therapy for 6 weeks. Even that's not, you have to say, and here was the result of that. You know what I mean? So it's like a number of steps. So you want to obviously report whatever you need to report for these organizations, but you also, because you want to continue being funded, but it's also, excuse me, relationship building. And, you know, there have been folks that we met with, like with the Gates Foundation, and that individual was like, I know 3 other places that you should contact for, you know, capital funds, but you need to get to this point before you do. So you want to obviously foster those relationships and make sure you stay in touch. The plan is, because a lot of this is new for us, but the plan is to invite our funders to our events. So when we do Agenda, for example, we want all of them to get an invitation so they can come and see, even if their money doesn't fund that specific program, so that they can see what our community looks like. I think that's really, really important. So you want to give them as much insight and connection. You just want to be remembered so that when they see your application again in the future, they want to keep funding you.
I love that. I love that. That's just touching more on the human aspect of building those connections. And as far as, I'm curious about how often you guys update them.
Our funders?
Yeah, quarterly, monthly?
They're all different. So there's one, for example, that's reimbursement based, and they want us to update them monthly. So every month we send them receipts for the work that ties to that grant funding. And it's narrative, but it's also like actual receipts and things like that. So they're a monthly check-in, and that's it's a state, they're funded by the state. And so a lot of their requirements, even though it's a foundation, it's like a public foundation, basically. So it's funded by the state. So they're monthly. There's another one that it's at the end of the year. So it's a 1-year grant. At the end of the year, that's when we would give them the update of what we did and how it worked. What I like about a lot of our funders is they don't want to bog you down in like paperwork and numbers, and what they want you to focus on your program, like implement your program, but also make sure you're measuring and you have ways to measure the success of your program. A lot of them understand, and I'm very honest, and I tell them, like, a lot of this is a pilot for us. We've never done this before. So even though we've done, our community center has been around for a while, and we've done some of these programs for a while, but we haven't actually, you know, done it in this way. And so I tell them, like, this is very much a pilot for us. So work with us and be patient with us and teach us, you know, and a lot of them are good. They'll give you technical assistance money. And so what that means is they pay for someone to teach you how to document and teach you how to like record accurately and what to look for and how to create surveys that work and things like that. And so they pay for it on your behalf so that you're able to learn that. I just did a 3-day sort of technical assistance thing with one of the grantor, or one of the people who gave us a grant last week. And so I learned a lot about, you know, how should we be asking questions, how you can do a survey that measures, because you don't want to do multiple surveys, because you might miss a survey. Like if the person doesn't respond the second time or the third time, then your survey's messed up. But they gave us some techniques for doing a survey one time, and you just ask people to like look back in time and compare that to now. So that way you're only doing one survey instead of multiple ones. So things like that.
Oh, wow. That's my first time hearing about the technical assistance, but that's incredible. What kind of methodologies are being deployed to measure the success or the impact on the youth specifically?
That's what we're developing. So that's a lot of what we're working on when we do these technical assistance. And it's going to be interesting to like, because again, it's a pilot. So we'll see how it all works out. But a lot of it is developing the surveys to accurately capture what we're trying to capture. And so a lot of it will be done through surveys. And you incentivize people to do the surveys, because not a lot of people do the surveys when you send things out, but you can do things like they'll allow you to build it into your grant where you give them a gift card for responding or whatever. But a lot of that we're still developing. So to be determined, I'll let you know once we have those things in place, because that's another thing. Now you won't have to recreate that. I'll be able to say, here's how we measured the success of our business entrepreneurship program, or of our youth mental health program. And that is just what works for us. It may not work for you, but at least you have something to reference and not have to like start from nowhere, you know, like what we're doing.
Right, laying those seeds. So I know we might go a little over this last question, but I know you guys have plans to get a full team. Are you guys going to have a liaison in-house on the team, or is the grant writer going to be the person to be going back and forth between you guys and the funders themselves?
That's a really good question. So it's kind of amazing how much we can do with the lack of capacity that we have right now. And that's because I act as a full-time director, basically, even though I'm volunteer. But the goal is to really build out our team and make sure all of our programs have program managers, to make sure we have, the executive staff that we need to be able to answer community and answer questions and plan events and all of that. Because right now our board is like really worn out because we do everything. Like, we're planning, we're visioning, we're the ones setting up at the events, we're the ones, you know what I mean? Like, making sure the finances are good, making sure, like everything, meeting with funders. It's too much. It's really too much. It's not sustainable. So the goal is, there's a foundation here called the Colorado Health Foundation that does capacity building, because they see health holistically. It's not just like, are you eating a balanced meal or are you exercising? They look at like health of communities. And so they see the work of like nonprofits like ours as contributing to the well-being of the community. So they have money set aside to do capacity building for organizations. So that's what we have applied for. And I think we'll get some funding from them. And so our first goal is to fill in our staff. So making sure we have our executive team in line, our program managers in place, hiring youth as much as we can. So we're able to give our young people stipends for being a part of programs and for helping and organizing events and that kind of stuff. So we're, giving back to our community and hiring from within our community. That would be our first goal. The grant writer situation is working for us right now. I know some people do hire in-house. I don't think that we need to do that at this point in time. Maybe that changes down the road, but I think having a grant writer who does, they're giving us, our budget's about 500. That might increase a little bit, as we grow and our needs grow. Right now that works for us, but we'll see. We'll see.
We'll see on grant writing 2.0, 201.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I have to say the abundance of knowledge and wealth you've given in this it's been absolutely invaluable. Some of the main and key takeaways that I personally heard is understand your story, know your vision, establish it, clear, concise, and broad, have those goals, milestones, and organizationally establish yourself. Get the 501(c)(3), fill out that 990, get the EIN. There's too much money to be accessed out there to push our communities forward.
Absolutely. You hit everything on the head. And a lot of people are asking for the slides. Yes. Hopefully you'll be able to, there's a bunch of emails, email those. And then also maybe it's public on your website, on the TPN website. I'm not sure, but if there's a way, we'll get the slides out. If you don't get them for some reason, you can reach out to me or Walta or TPN or whoever, and we'll make sure that you get the slides. But yeah, if there's ever need for more conversation, I'm happy to do that. I know I can be really busy, and so I'm not necessarily the quickest to get back in touch with people, but I'll do my best. But I think TPN is the perfect liaison for this. I'm really grateful that you all put this together and can be, the lead on getting information out. So appreciate you.
Absolutely. The slides will be accessible via the website, but if anyone wants them sent directly to their email, please just drop the email in the chat. Team members at TPN are recording that. Millete, before we finish and wrap up, are there any final remarks or statements you'd like to say?
No, the biggest thing I want people to understand is there's nothing special about the Tigray community of Colorado. There really isn't. It really is because we know our story and we understand what we're trying to accomplish. So take the time with your board and do the mission and visioning and all that stuff. Take the time and do that. It really makes a difference. Make sure your governance documents are in order. Took a lot of time for us. And then define your programs. Decide what you want to do, and don't pick a lot of things. Pick 3 things. Be really good at 3 things, and develop your program and be able to give someone a sentence that describes your program, but also a really thorough, half page or something that describes your program. That's very specific. How many people do you touch? What's the impact of whatever engagement that you have with them? So, and then keep in mind, all of this money is local money And so they want to know that there's a local impact. So you have to tell the story of why your program makes that city, that state, that citizen better. And so that's all you have to do is just connect those dots, but anyone can do it. And, yeah, we're here to support.
Beautifully stated. Thank you so much. You've definitely fanned the flames of Tegaru Pride. I believe we're all ready to get to hard work and go get some grant money.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the night.